Transport for London at some ungodly hour in the morning or something. But because the service was offered in their place of work, and because it was a nutrition-based service, they felt safe to then segue into. So it's like if you go to your GP and they say, mental health session 10 o'clock, you won't get the man queuing up. But if you say we're just doing stress or we're just doing something else, men will turn up for something that isn't called mental health or counselling, but then they probably will start to use it. So I think you're right that we need to not ignore change in enabling men to feel that it's okay, you are still a man if you do that. That's the point. We have the same issue with the archetype for women. There is still a pressure on girls to be glamorous and attractive. You can see that in all our media and everything. That hasn't changed. That won't change. That's in the species. But what we can do culturally is to make girls feel safer, that they can be attractive in many different ways. There isn't just one archetypal image of a female that is... Because girls get distressed if they don't match up to an image of femininity that is put in all the media. So we've got to be clever with girls, and we can't say to them, don't worry about being unglamorous, because that's not going to work. What you can say is, you can be glamorous in many different ways or attractive. Same way we've got to say to boys, it doesn't not matter to be strong, but you actually, if you seek help and you do all this stuff and you end up sort of getting some help, you're being that, you're not being a man, you are being a man. So we've got to culturally expand the application of archetypes. So you can't change the archetypes because they're just in our species. We're a gendered species, and the male and female aspects of our species, there are certain things that are universal, certain things that we can culturally express differently. Same thing, what constitutes an attractive female, say, has changed throughout societies or in different tribes, but the idea of a female attracting males is a universal thing. You just look at every film, every story, every poem, every love song, all our pop culture, it's all based on these archetypes. So as psychologists, we have to try and study the human condition in all its aspects. But we're not saying, men are men and women are women and we just got to not change anything. What we're trying to change everything. We're trying to change the way people use gender, but we're not going to actually culturally react to gender in more culturally sensitive ways unless we acknowledge that there is an issue, that there is and that there are some universal archetypal aspects to it. So I think it's both. So it's probably a long-winded answer to your question.
Hearing to both of you talking, there is in my mind concept of male and female. I'm curious to know how you guys think of the gay community, which in my view, I always saw this two different two different, what I would say, corners of it. Males here, females there. And more we see all this, the gay community coming up, and for both men and women. And I always, in my mind, think that there is the gender kind of coming together in the sense of like, now there is not only men and women on that side, there is a whole spectrum in the middle. And I'm curious with all the data that you showed us, how much of those men in the scale of men and women, if they are these macho men, they're I'm macho and I don't do this, or if they are more in contact with their femininity, let's put that way. They're like, so they have this stereotype of, oh, they're more gay, they're more feminine, so they are more likely to go to therapy instead of a male, more macho with the other stereotype. I don't know if I was clear on that.
But it's very early days, but it's a very important point. I mean, it's massive. This is the first thing we're doing is trying to open the dialogue about this. But of course, I took the whole idea of our research to the Terence Higgins Trust for precisely that reason, to try and take out. We had 3 gender archetypal rules for men that were fight, win, provide, protect, mastery and control, and the sort of the people at Terence Higgins Trust recognised that those were the pressures that gay men were feeling under as well, and they were being judged as not being men because of that. But actually, the way I look at it is it's a spectrum. You know, you have macho men who are sort of uber masculine, and then you may have men at the other end of the spectrum, but you have an average. So we're just saying that genders, it would be wrong to say men and women are completely different. That would be crazy to say that. Or that men and women are completely the same. That would be crazy. What we're saying is they have different populations that overlap. You know, and this is biological too. You know, because even a transgender person who's been socialised, say they've got a male body, they look male, and they're treated as a boy for years, and they just can't live, their identity is female. Because actually we haven't done very sophisticated research into fetal development, that actually the brain can be sexed at a different stage than the body. You can actually have a female brain in a male body. And if you were socialising gender, someone looks like a boy and has been brought up as one is going to be a boy, but that isn't the case. So transgender shows that there's a biology to gender identity, but obviously people are going to be on a spectrum. You can have some people a male, female, sort of almost 50-50. So we're only looking at averages. We're not saying, you know, this is how it should be. We're saying there's a spectrum. And of course sexuality is another issue. Gender identity is one thing, sexuality is another issue. And these are early days, so you know, we need to be asking all these kind of questions as we go along, definitely.
I think it's interesting because it doesn't usually occur to me to ask people their sexual orientation when we do these surveys. We did ask people for a while about whether they're male, female or other, and we just usually get so few people saying other that there's not enough to analyse any data. But it's an interesting question. I mean, I suppose, like when you're looking at our findings, this is just men and women, including gay men and gay women, and we're not treating them as special cases or anything like that. And I'd say that again, there's a lot of evidence just that being gay is part of the normal spectrum of the way people are. I mean, it's a normal thing. So, I mean, I don't think that
my question was like, if are these men that are not looking for therapy, or they are the ones that have problem with therapy, are more the male that are these minors?
Yeah, see, that's what you're saying.
Or is a whole thing as a gender, male in general?
I think that's a sophisticated question that you're actually, so as the man moves more towards the female end of the spectrum of masculinity, they're more likely to. I would suspect that's probably true, but that's just a hypothesis, and we need to ask. That's a really important and very great question that we should be researching.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we don't know because we don't ask those questions.
Probably that's my thesis for the end of the year.
Great. Please let us know the findings, because we need to get a body of data together. Because this is, you know, we're just evolving our understanding of this stuff. I mean, like, we're just at a point in history where we've got certain attitudes to things, and things will change and evolve. And it's only through dialogue and research, raising awareness, that we become more clear. I mean, it wasn't that long ago homosexuality was illegal. That's only 50 years ago. It was illegal, and that's incredible.
Yeah, it's its own sort of blindness, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think it's amazing what you guys do. It's really amazing.
Thanks. If you aren't going to do that, if you are going to do that research, we do send it in, do submit it to be presented at the Med Psychology Conference.
We'd love that.
It genuinely is a very interesting question. I'm thinking, why haven't I thought of that before? You know, it makes me feel like I'm getting something wrong. But yeah, do send it in. I think maybe 2 more questions, do you think?
Yeah.
2 more questions, yeah. Okay.
You can stay with the microphone, I have a loud voice.
I'll tell you what, just for the sake of recording everything, it's good if we do this.
You're very sensitive, thank you. It's wonderful talking about the need for improved psychology and physiology and all the rest. The real problem for most men is that most stress is a family breakdown. And we have a situation where if the man seeks therapy during that process, and that comes to the attention of the court, it is then portrayed, and is usually brought to the attention of the court, I can assure you, it is portrayed as being he has mental health problems, he's a danger to the children, If the woman is having therapy, it's because she's distressed and needs help. So this double bind is absolutely crucial, because the amount of men I know who've had breakdowns and a few have had suicides, they're caught in this horrible trap. They fear they're going to lose any chance of contact with their children, not just because of accusations, but because of to go for help. What they say there, in what they believe is privacy, will then be extrapolated, modified. So this is the most crucial part, I think, of the harsh end of the scale. Thank you.
It's a very, very good point. And I've seen it with women too, because I've helped a lot of women who've had mental health problems, and they're trying to get care of their kids. But I think you're right, there's a gender difference, so it's even more accentuated for men. But I've tried to sort of write reports to support women who are labelled as mentally unfit to have their kid because they're seeking help. And one of the things that makes you mentally damaged is to lose your kids. So what I'm putting in my reports as a psychologist, and when I've done this in the past, is to say, it's actually, I would be more worried about the mental state of someone who didn't get distressed when they lost their kids than if they did. So it's a normal human reaction. If you don't have access to your kids, because we have a mental illness-based model of mental health, people losing access to their kids is seen as a sort of stress factor rather than just the whole cause. I mean, obviously, we live to have relationships, to have kids. If we can't see our own kids, that's a huge suicide risk factor. Then men and women do process that differently, and then they get responded to differently. You're quite right. And one of the things I plan to do in the future is we're setting up male-friendly spaces for help. We will have pro bono solicitors floating around just for guys to come in and talk to get access to the kids, because there's a much better way of getting reducing the suicide rate for men is to get more access to the kids. So this is a psychologist. I'm not thinking about doing psychology on everybody. That's very narcissistic. What we're trying to think about is how do we deal with a problem. If not having work makes you suicidal, we should be helping employment programs, so it is political stuff as well. But the key thing is, access to children is vital, because fathers kind of get blamed both ways, they get seen as men do get seen as a danger to kids if they're involved with them. They're seen as sort of dangerous. And if they're not with them, they're seen as absent fathers and they're blamed for not being with them. There's a kind of double bind with men and kids. And the whole of society has sort of rather tarnished the whole gender with the paedophilia thing, and there's all kinds of stuff. I remember trying to see my kids, take a film on my kids in a school play, and I wasn't able to, because of this stuff. They're basically taking a couple of very small minority of damaged people and making the whole of society's attitudes coloured by that. So as a man, and if I saw a young girl, if I was sitting on my own in a park and a young girl fell over and grazed her knee and her parents were 100 yards away, I wouldn't pick that child up, because you feel like there are attitudes to you. You feel like a middle-aged guy picking up. There's toxic attitudes to the male gender. And when it comes to childcare, there are archetypes there too. And one of those, is obviously about female nurturing and mothering, and that's which is very important. I think we should respect those differences. But equally, fathering is equally important, but it's different. And we don't want to say that we've got to be careful to equally value different things. But access to children is the thing which would make most of us suicidal. That's what I said earlier, that if you lose access to your kids, if there's no one, when you go home tonight, there's no one to talk to, you've got no partner in life, if you don't have any meaningful role in life, if you don't feel listened to, if you don't, we'd all be suicidal. The human condition, but for men and women there are different kind of nuances to it. And that's partly archetypal, but it's also cultural. But what we forget is that there are any differences at all. So the first thing to do is to at least honour differences when it comes to gender. But you're absolutely right, that's what's killing a lot of guys, that they can't see their kids. It's that simple, and we have to help them see their kids. And that's a legal issue, it's a political issue, but it's also about being clever with our services. We should involve advice on how to see your kids in mental health services, but how many mental health services have a legal advisor on how to get access to your kids working? And yet that's the risk factor. So if we're epidemiologists, if we did that with cancer,
Yeah.
we'd be regarded as idiots.
Thank you.
Sure. Excellent point. One area I am trying to do research in, but nothing's happening just yet, is exactly what kind of impact the family courts do have on suicides. I think that there is some evidence that it's definitely causal, but the point you raise about men being put off actually seeking help because it's going to damage the case, I mean that is really a problem. I mean that's not something I was aware of, but that's a really serious issue.
Good point.
That's what we have to tell them every week at the meetings. Because we know from experience that if they went to court or any part of the process that comes up that they are getting help, their chances of seeing the kids even in a contact centre put back on average by a year.
Okay, well, we need to talk about this more, definitely.
There's also the other issue, just very briefly, about fatherless. You know, Robin Hadley's done a lot of work on men who aren't able to have kids, and the impact on men of not being able to have kids. It's assumed that it doesn't matter to men; they're just sort of blokes. But the impact on fatherlessness, and I myself was told I wouldn't have kids when I was sort of younger, and I've got 3, thankfully. But the impact on me was very enormous, you know, because men want to be fathers too, you know, and not this big kid. So we've got to look at all these things a bit more. We've got to be a bit more caring about our own species, about our own, you know, and look at gender as a very rich part of our lives instead of something where we just airbrush all the differences out for political reasons mainly, and then we're just all going to suffer if we don't get it right.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Any more questions? Maybe we can time for one more question.
Yeah, what you were saying about sort of establishing the difference between the genders, what I find quite interesting is the fact that I've been reading a lot on sort of studies that have been done on gender and the difference between men and women, and quite a lot of books, for example, Delusions of Gender, which you might have probably read already, perhaps?
Just heard.
Yeah. So that book sort of puts the view forward that gender is something that we've sort of created by society, and I know that there are biological differences, but at the same time it's, for example, like studies on